when you're working with stars, there's a thing called star syndrome where you start treating the star and not the condition. But at the end of the day, they're just another human being with a problem that needs to be solved. And you need to focus on that problem. Irrespective of who they are, they get the same level of treatment that you would treat anybody with a problem. We're looking outside from a cricket perspective, we're looking outside to get insight to help cricket. But within India, other sports still look at cricket as paving the way for them also within this country.
Welcome to Inspire Someone Today podcast, a show where we dive into the stories and insights that has the power to create ripples of inspiration in your life. I'm your host Shrikant, and I'm thrilled to be with you on this journey of inspiration. Welcome back, my dear listeners, for yet another episode of Inspire Someone Today. Joining us today, who is on the house, we have a world-famous sports physiotherapist and a sports scientist who has been working very closely with Indian sports for the last decade and a half. It's an absolute joy to have John Gloster to be our guest on this episode of Inspire Someone Today. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you. My pleasure. Always happy to talk sport and talk inspiring things and sort of deep dive into India, but particularly Indian sport. I always look forward to that.
Yeah, I know you're taking this much needed break from a very hectic schedule that you've had. Your team did a fantastic job on the IPL circuit. You represent Rajasthan Royals, and the Rajasthan Royals have been in the top 4 2 out of 3 times in the last 3 years.
That's correct. Yeah. In fact, I think if you look at the stats, I think we're the most successful team out of the last 3 years consistently. So that's always good to know. And I'm sure some of the practices that we've brought, particularly from the clinical and medical side, have something to do with that. Or I like to think so. But yeah, it's a long 11 weeks for us, support staff, going early to the tournament. And then really it's 24 hours a day, as you know, from then on in for the next 10, 11 weeks of the tournament. And if you happen to be there at the pointy end of the season, obviously it's another week. So we're always happy to be there at the end. Unfortunately, another couple of days would have been nice. But I think if you look at the competition now, 10 teams, it's very, very difficult to even just get to the finals these days. You know, the top 4, the top 40% only goes through. And that in itself, I think, is a huge achievement, given the level of competition that we now see in cricket in India and the IPL.
That's true. I'm sure a lot of our listeners will be dying to hear the inside story of what goes behind the scenes. We'll get to that. Before that, for you, it's home away from home. You have made India as your home for the last 15 plus years. Is that right?
Yeah, it's 20 years now. I think 2004, wow. I think I came. Yeah, so it's coming up to 20 years. So yeah, 100%. Very embedded into not just Indian lifestyle, but obviously Bombay, as you know, has been my home for the last 20 years. The first 4 years with the Indian team, so there was a lot of travel involved in those first 4 years, as you know, and being on the road consistently. I made the Taj Palace my home in Bombay for those first few years, which was lovely, and allowed me to see what I call the real Bombay, which is that South Bombay area, and where a lot of things happen, and obviously the 2 premier stadiums in the country, Wankhede and CCI, are also down that side of Bombay. So yeah, it's been my life for the last 20 years, and Australia is home, but these days it's not that far away. You know, it's only 4.5 hours to Singapore, and then to Adelaide, which is my hometown. It's only another 6 hours. So really, it's not even a day's journey these days to get back to Australia, which I try and do at least twice a year.
It's wonderful. So with all of these things going on, John, how did this journey start for you? What made you to go down this path of being a physiotherapist, sports scientist? Where was this seed sown?
I think sport's always been my love, and I competed at quite high levels in Australia in numerous sports: athletics, Australian rules football, cricket being my premier sort of sport. Later on, I ventured into motor racing in the form of rallying. But I actually started my sort of university career, sort of with this desire to become a lawyer or an architect, but that never really came to fruition. In fact, I was a bit confused, so I ended up finishing my first degree and finishing doing geomorphology and a bit of geophysics, which was quite interesting. A far cry from where I ended up, but it was at that time that I was interacting with a lot of physios, sports physios and physio friends and colleagues and who were at university with me. And I thought, wow, that looks like a pretty cool career. So I just transferred across, and the next 4 or 5 years was spent at the University of South Australia, one of the premier physio-medical allied health institutions in the world. And I was very fortunate to be studying there, the home of physiotherapy. And then that journey took me back into sport again, both as a player, continuing that journey, but then realizing that I needed to sort of, as we all do, at some point make a choice. But I thought, look, I don't want to give up sport. I knew I sort of had to as a player, but I continued that journey, being involved as a sports physio and therefore being able to impact perhaps on a greater stage than I could as an individual playing sport. And that took me to eventually to various journeys, locums at the Australian Institute of Sport, various clubs and sports bodies in Australia, where I wet my feet in the sort of more elite sports space. And then I had the opportunity to go to Surrey, which was Surrey County Cricket in England in the mid-late 90s, 97, 98 season. And that was where I really fell in love with cricket, or fell in love with cricket as a sport, but also where I was in a position to then impact on that sport positively. And we had a very, very successful next 4 years at Surrey as a club. And from that, I then moved to Bangladesh. And that, again, was another very, very culturally very difficult for me, because going from England to Bangladesh in the year 2000, 2001, when they first got their test status, was a very big leap. But it matured me as a professional, and it matured me as an individual who was taking a big step. Professionally, I was taking a big step and going into international cricket and managing the test team. And then the next 4 years was an opportunity for me to then start building something as well with a team that really was coming from not a lot in terms of particularly medical support services, and trying to sort of lay some foundations there that would then further benefit the team as we went forward. And I believe I was able to do that. I worked with some really good people over there, the likes of Justin Cordy and Paul Chapman, and then Dav Watmore as coach, Trevor Chappell as coach, and it's some really, really good people who genuinely wanted to change Bangladesh cricket. And I think we're seeing the fruits of that, 20 years later today. And then the opportunity to come to India. Mr. Dalmia, I remember calling me back in 2004 and saying, look, we'd like you to come to India. And that was the start of this 2-decade journey here. And if you look at Indian cricket at that time, it was a fascinating place to be, actually. John Wright was still coaching then. So the first part of my stint was with Wrighty, wonderful human being, and heading a very, very, very successful team. On paper was probably the most talented team in the world, I think, at the time, with the likes of Ganguly, Dravids, Tendulkar, Lakshman, Zahir Khan, Ashish Neeraj, Harbhajan Singh, Virender Sehwag, incredible talent. And so I was very lucky to work through that period of, a number of coaches from Greg Chappell to Gary Kirsten, but also to see 4 captains come and go in that period. Ganguly then transitioned to Rahul, to Anil, and then to the first part of the captaincy of MS Dhoni. So what a period of Indian cricket that was, and I was very fortunate enough to be not only involved in it, but at some level trying to influence it for the better. And I think that this whole fitness journey of sport, or cricketers in sport in this country, perhaps started particularly with me and the 2 people, Greg King, that I worked with at the time, but then that being embraced by people like John Wright, Greg Chappell, Gary Kirsten, these guys that felt that Indian cricket needed to take on the fitness mantra a little more sort of proactively, perhaps, if we wanted to be consistently more successful in international cricket. So I'd like to think that was part of, I was able to play a small part in that role, and then continue that role when I left that and moved into the IPL arena in 2008 with Rajasthan Royals, and I've been there ever since.
Yeah, what a journey it has been, and no better seat than the seat that you had to see things in close quarters, to see how things had changed, how things have transformed, not just for, like you said, not just for the Indian cricket, but for sports in general in India.
Yeah, that's very true.
Having said that, John, how easy, how difficult it was for you to kind of work with different set of stakeholders, different set of cultures, right? With the coaching staff that you mentioned, all folks were not who are not from India, the likes of John Wright, the likes of Greg Chappell, Custer, and then the administrators and the players. Some of the players that you mentioned, there were stars in their own right and might. So walk us through that, how easy, how difficult it was to kind of bring in the whole notion of fitness. How did you even work with these individuals to kind of get them going?
For me, it was tapping back into experience and my experiences working with the best in the world at the Australian Institute of Sport, or tapping back into my experiences from the dressing room from the Surrey days. If you look at that Surrey dressing room when I was there in the late 90s, every single member of that first 11 were international cricketers. The likes of Stewart, Thorpe, Hollyoaks, Browns, Tudors, Bicknells, Sacklanes, incredible dressing room, all complete superstars in their own right, but functioned very well together, which often doesn't happen, because they removed ego and they saw that the club was more important, or the team was more important than the individual. So they were very, very successful. Plus, they were managed by a very good man manager who was Keith Medlicott at the time. So I knew that those experiences were going to certainly help me when I stepped into a very similar dressing room of superstars with the Indian team. But then culturally, I was helped by my experiences in Bangladesh and being more sensitive to the world around me. And I think that was my greatest takeaway from Bangladesh, was they really softened me and they really made me more sensitive to the individual. But at the core of it, really, when you're working with stars, there's a thing called star syndrome, where you start treating the star and not the condition. But at the end of the day, they're just another human being with a problem that needs to be solved. And you need to focus on that problem, irrespective of who they are. They get the same level of treatment that you would treat anybody with a problem. So taking that mindset and that approach into my clinical practice, I think, helped me as well. But it was without doubt the experiences that I had in that Surrey dressing room that was probably the key foundation for my integrating into the Indian team dressing room. We were obviously, as you said, there were international sort of coaching staff at that time as well. And I think if there was a consistent theme across that coaching staff, it was around this area of fitness and improving fitness. And I've said it many, many times that technically and on paper, that was probably the best side in the world. But why weren't they consistently the best side in the world in terms of results? And we all felt that it was because of fitness, and sort of skill and individual skill and technical skill will only take you so far, particularly in Test cricket, where it comes down to other factors. And that is, endurance, durability, fitness, all those sorts of things that we talk about. So that was the piece that I felt that if we managed to stitch those two together, get the technical and the physical together, then you're going to see more consistent outcomes from the team and less injuries, less days lost to injury, et cetera, and that more consistent selection you have of a side, the more consistent performances you always have, and data tells us that. So that's important to understand, and then going forward, having that sort of journey that we commenced, that fitness journey that we commenced on, having that taken forward even further by the likes of some of the players that were coming in at that time, the younger players who believed that was the way forward as well. So you started to get that era of MS Dhoni's, Suresh Rainas, Yuvraj Singh's, that group that were Mohammed Kaif's, that were coming through to say, well, hang on, yeah, I agree that fitness perhaps is going to be the differentiator. And then fortunately for Indian cricket, along came a young guy called Virat Kohli, who saw that as the secret sauce or the elixir of performance, and he embraced it probably more than anybody. And when he came into a leadership role with the team, it was no coincidence that when he combined the non-negotiable fitness mantra with his technical expertise and expertise of the others in the team, that they became consistent, the most consistent team and number one in all formats of the game over the next few years. So I think that is I'd like to think that was the journey that we started, and now, as you know, it's, if you look at cricket globally, and particularly the subcontinent, that a huge emphasis is placed on performance and fitness performance.
Yep. Never before have you seen so much of impetus on fitness than what you're seeing in the recent past. With that, I bring in two elements: is how have you kind of seen and handled change? You did mention some of those superstars, irrespective of the star category of the players. How easy and what are some of the methods that you adapted or you saw some of the boards adapting to manage change?
As I said, you're working with the best players in the world, and on paper they are the best players in the world. And so they have every right to say, well, whatever I'm doing now is working because I'm the best. So the only way you can change that is by demonstrating improvements and demonstrating quick improvements and showing them that they could be even better. And the other concept that I believed in and that I tried to believe in and bring into this is what we call this term of durability. I think we use the term longevity now, but I like to term it as durability. So the longer that the fitter you are, not only a performance is going to improve, but the longer you're going to stay on the field and the longer your career is going to be. So we talk about it in the terms of longevity for a sports person as being able to stay at their peak performance injury-free for the longest periods of time. So how do we do that? And that ultimately is durability, and that's what we're all strive for as athletes. Your potential to earn as an athlete is quite limited at the best of times. So one of our roles as player managers, asset managers, as you want to call us, is to ensure that we improve that longevity cycle for them. And I think if you can get them to buy into that by you being a little bit fitter, you embracing some of these new sort of techniques, these new ideas, these new mantras, is that performance is not going to suffer. In fact, performance will gradually improve as well. But ultimately what I'm asking is I want to see you, and the Indian public wants to see you on the field for a longer period of time. Because if you stay on the field and you're present in the squad for long periods of time, then India is going to be a more successful team and more consistent team. So I think that was the way was to deliver those messages, was you have to show improvement and you've got to show benefit to the ultimate beneficiary, who is the player, and then ultimately the team as a whole. So that's the way I sort of addressed it, and we all know the relationship between fitness and reduced injury rates and performance outcomes, etc. So it was difficult in those days. We didn't have the technology that we have now, with various wearable technologies, various catapult devices, GPS tracking, testing, physiology testing, things like that we can demonstrate objectively with these players or for these players what we're trying to do and the outcomes that we're getting for them. So our job's a little bit easier now with technology. So I've got raw numbers that I can present to a player. Rather than just hearing me talk, I can go to them with numbers and say, right, this is the difference. And we can see that objectively. And that makes a big difference. Players are very tactile individuals. They're very visible, they like visible things. They like to see things rather than just consistently just hear stuff. And they take it on board much better if they've got something objective to work with. Yeah, so I think that was probably it. And demonstrating that there are other teams who are doing it. And if you want to keep up and stay with these other teams, then, and that's very obvious to see with the Australians of the world and the South Africans and, the other more physical type teams where they're not technically as good, but they're probably physically probably physically better, but and also therefore more durable, which means that they can more consistently deliver their skill sets, even though their skill sets might not be as good. They're able to stay on the field and injury-free enough to deliver more on those skills, and therefore the team is going to benefit. So I think that was probably the biggest sort of. I look to other sports and demonstrate to the players that how the other sports train and why they train the way they do. And then once we started to get raw numbers, particularly from the catapult GPS devices, we could then start comparing the exertions of our players in various formats, T20, ODI, etc., and then comparing it against other sports of similar exertions. And it was fascinating to see that T20 cricket sort of revolutionized the way we train cricketers, because from the raw numbers, and when you break it down into some of the detail that we look at, like total distances covered, time spent in certain speed bands, etc., the exertions on a cricket field in T20 IPL matches is not dissimilar to the exertions of a midfielder in EPL and some of the players in Australian rules football, because the time duration is pretty similar as well. So why shouldn't we therefore be training and learning from those individuals and the way they train? So that was a real eye-opener for us. So one of my mantras has always been is look to other sports in order to improve our sport, because they're obviously doing something really good and they're very good at what they do. So we should be looking out to learn from them as well. And at the same time, then proving our own methods and methodologies for the sport that we're in, which is cricket in the subcontinent, being a particularly sort of unique environment in itself.
Any ideas that you're very proud of that you brought from other sport that you implemented and saw results, maybe at a team level or at a player level?
Well, definitely the use of technology. So like I said, I was the first to introduce Catapult, the GPS systems here in India. We brought that back into IPL, must have been 6-7 years ago at least now. And most teams are using it now. We were the first to start using things like Aura rings to track, players' recovery rates, particularly their sleep data, physiology testing, blood testing, all these things. It's all about insight, As I say to the players, the more I know about you, the more I can help you and more I can therefore mitigate injury risk. So they're very open. Again, you talked about compliance earlier and what brings that on. Well, if I can demonstrate that I'm going to improve an outcome for them, whether that be sleep, whether that be recovery, whether that be injury rates, etc., by implementing some of these strategies and bringing technology into the conversation, then most of the players are very open to it. And you'll see they're all wearing their Catapult devices, they're all wearing their Aura rings on their fingers, they're all being tracked with various devices, So I think that's been, and the beauty is that not only have I taken that from other sports to bring here, I'm also now taking it from our sport of IPL, my sport of IPL, T20 cricket here, into other sports within India that I'm involved in. I'm head of sports science and medicine at the Go Sports Foundation out of Bangalore, who works with the sort of the next generation of Indian Olympians and Paralympians, as well as many of the current Olympians. And we're taking these technologies to benefit those athletes as well across India also. So I still think that, we're looking outside from a cricket perspective, we're looking outside to get insight to help cricket. But within India, other sports still look at cricket as paving the way for them also within this country. So it's very, very important that we keep breaking the boundaries for cricket and therefore technology and sport and innovation, so that the other sports within India can also benefit as well. And that's what I like to do. I like to make sure that, cricket still has the loudest voice, obviously, in this country. So make sure that what everybody else is hearing from cricket is the best of the best. The best technologies, the best insight, the best research, and therefore all sport is ultimately going to benefit. If we look forward and go beyond, if we look forward now, and I'm always saying this to people, let's look forward to 2036, because 2036 has been pegged now as sort of an endpoint for where Indian sport is going to take off, and that being the Olympic campaign in 2036, then India intends to bid for that. And how can we, in some small way, through cricket or through what I'm doing now, ensure that we get to that endpoint in a really, really strong, safe and sort of successful way? And I think that's where we're going to have to look at other sports overseas, but also to look where we're heading with cricket and what we're doing with cricket and the success of cricket in this country to help us with those decisions also about getting India as a sporting nation over the line in 2036 and therefore onto the podiums in 2036. So that's also, a driver for me is this overall education of the sports space in India. And if I can play some small role into improving that and seeing Indians on the podiums overseas, then I'll be more than happy.
Can't be a better time for Indian sports than now to kind of get onto that momentum, and lucky to have folks like you in the ecosystem. John, you mentioned about your stints with the IPL. Walk us through that experience of what does it feel like behind the boundary line? And you have been associated with IPL almost right from the inception of IPL.
That's correct. Well, first of all, what does it feel like? It normally feels very hot because it's in the middle of summer and those dugouts are not the most comfortable environments, trust me, particularly if you're in Jaipur in 45 degrees or in Chennai in a day game in the humidity. But anyway, yes, I've been with the journey since day one. In fact, it's quite an incredible story because I remember in 2007, we played a test match in India, Australia. I was with the Indian team. We were playing a test match in Adelaide. And Lalit Modi had flown in. He was president, vice president of the BCCI, president of Rajasthan. He had flown to Adelaide, and he met me in Adelaide. And he explained to me a little bit about this concept that they were going to roll with in India in 2008, this thing called the Indian Premier League. And I thought, wow, that sounds fascinating. And he said, look, I really want you to help me with some of this. And I helped him ultimately going forward with some of the contracts with the support staff and et cetera, et cetera. So I sort of had a taste of that probably before anyone else. And then I was very fortunate enough to be involved with the Rajasthan Royals franchise right from 2008. And so that journey has been unbelievable to see where not only this sport and the sport of T20 has grown in this country, but then what, as I said before, what it's done for other sport in this country and what it's done for the peripheral sort of ecosystems of support that go around making teams successful. I was also very lucky to be involved in the 2007 World Cup win in South Africa in T20. And there were some key figures that were obviously instrumental in the success of that, MS Dhoni being one of them. And I often get asked, what kick-started this whole revolution of T20 and why were you successful right from the start? And I think when I look back at that journey, it was a really interesting squad. Most of the squad from the previous series, which was in England, was an ODI series, 7-match ODI series that we played in England. And a lot of the senior players actually went back to India, and we went direct South Africa from England from that tour. And a lot of the young kids came over and met us in South Africa from India. And I remember MS Dhoni saying that, look, let's just have a bit of fun with this and we'll see what happens. And it struck me at the time that what does he mean by having fun? Everyone talks about having fun. So I said, well, it's probably nothing new, but he genuinely meant, let's make this an experience that we're all going to remember. It's a young squad. It's a new squad. It was his captaincy for the first time. And what I've thought about recently since then is that when you bring fun into the center of any equation, you push the biggest limiting factor in sport to the periphery, and that's fear. Because fear and fun can't combine. They can't work together. And when I look back at it now, I think, and I often talk about this, is I think that was probably the key ingredient that MS brought into that squad, and therefore the success of that tournament was the fact that fun came into the center and never left. So fear was never able to be brought in, and they played fearlessly. If you look back at some of we just had a lot of fun. Even that bowl out against Pakistan. If you look at the expressions on the faces of the Indian boys and the way they rallied around each other, that was fun and therefore success. There was no fear. There was no fear involved in any of those. Even when we lost to New Zealand, there was still no fear because it was still fun. And so I think that was a brilliant sort of introduction to T20. And that's why I knew when sort of Lalit proposed it initially, why I thought that was going to be a success, because I'd seen what it had done to India on the back of the disappointment of the 2007 World Cup in the West Indies, again, which I was involved in, and then the public rallying around us when we won in the T20 format. I knew that there was going to be something special about this IPL, and look, I mean, 17 years later, or 17 seasons later, you can see why. And it's not just because of what it's done for T20 cricket globally, but what it's done for sport in India and what it's done for the professions that sport relies on in order to keep it at the fore. And that's sports physio, sports medicine, sports science, sports psychology, nutrition. All these under-recognized support services previously have now been brought to the fore on the back of, I think, the majority on the back of the success of Indian T20 cricket and the IPL. And so for me, they are the key ingredients to the success of all sport. And without that being recognized as a key ingredient, then sport will often fail. And that's why we're starting to see India do better at other sports, individually or collectively, on the international arena, is because we now have this ecosystem of support propping up our athletes, improving their durability and therefore improving their longevity. And that for me is more important than anything. And that for me is the biggest gift that the IPL has given to Indian sport.
I love that articulation, particularly the fun and fear element of it. And as you have been involved in this sport for such a long time, high performance coach as well, one element I want to draw your attention, get your insights than just your attention, is these high pressure situations, right? There's so much of scrutiny, high pressure environment in the game, particularly IPL, considering the travel, the scheduling, and also so many of those games are so close games, right? It's down to the wire. two things. How do you help players to cope up with these kind of high pressure environment? And secondly, what happens to the mental makeup of the players in these kind of situations where they got to defend a 10 run in the last over, or a batsman, if he were to be there, got to score like 15, 16 runs. And when they cross the line, it's great. There is celebration all around. But the biggest element is when they don't. How do you assess this kind of situation that somebody is not able to defend those last overs for 5 runs, 10 runs, or not able to cross the line?
Yeah, there's a lot to that question, and there's a lot around it. And I've seen many, many different sort of examples of why it works or why it doesn't work. But I think it all comes back to, first of all, situational awareness and being prepared for that situation and trying to sort of simulate those environments in other aspects, particularly in the training environment. And therefore that comes back to preparation. And the better prepared teams, either physically, mentally, technically, are the ones that ultimately generally have greater success. So it's exposure, exposing them to similar environments, working with really, really good people who have experienced those environments previously, so senior players. And that's why these open dressing rooms now, where you have this collective environment of not just varied skill sets, but varied nations, various experiences, who are then able to work with some of these younger players and bring those experiences directly into the dressing room for those that haven't been in those environments before. So that's been an incredible part of this IPL piece. But we're also very fortunate to work with individuals now in this country who have skills, who are then able to educate and pass knowledge and learnings onto young players. And we work with a very talented fellow at Rajasthan Royals called Mon Brockman, who's a mental conditioning coach, sports psychologist from Bangalore, who again, part of their role is to create and recreate these environments for players and these situations for players, and then monitor and train them for various outcomes. And the word that I like to use is that players perform best when they're in supportive environments and environments in which they're comfortable. And that's not just the physical environment, though that plays a huge role in that, but it's also the internal environment for that individual, but also the environment created by those individuals around them, and therefore how they see themselves within that environment. And, Shane Warne, the great Shane Warne, I think was probably the best at creating environments within dressing rooms. And but I talked earlier about this fear of failure. And he always embraced failure because, and I know it's a bit of a cliche, but it's the only environment where you learn to cope. But you can only do that if you're supported by really good people around you within your team who support you. And then he used to talk so there was a great sort of story that he used to tell about failure and sort of people reaching their potential. And he felt that most players, until you fail, don't really know where your thresholds are, either physical, emotional, mental, technical, whatever those thresholds may be or those limits may be. And he likened it to going to the edge of the cliff. And until you fall off the edge of the cliff, you actually don't know where that edge really is. So he always used to talk about, don't be afraid to fall off the edge of the cliff, because until you get there, you actually don't know where your limits are. So those guys hover around before the edge of that cliff. And so they're only ever operating or performing at sort of 75, 80, 85% of their actual potential. And he could see potential better than anyone warning. And he'd say, keep pushing, go to the edge, fall off, fail, whatever it may be. Because he said, then if you do fail, you'll then know where your limits are. You'll know where the edge of that cliff is. But, he said, you have to ensure that when you do fall, your teammates are there to catch you. Yeah. So when you fall, they are there to catch you. And not only do they catch you, they throw you back up onto the edge of the cliff again. So then you know where your limits are. He often spoke about that, and that's why he was able to get the best out of those guys in that 2008. Everyone sort of labelled us as no-hopers and whatever at the start of that tournament. And on paper, we probably were one of the weakest sides. But what they underestimated was the ability for a guy like Shane Warne to take every single one of those boys to the edge of the cliff and demonstrate to them where their limits were, and therefore allow them to express that in various situations on the field at their full potential. And that was part of the success. So that's a big part of it. And you cannot substitute game time match awareness match play in order to train for these moments. But the really good sides are the ones that try and recreate it in their training environments. And we do that, through various means, but everybody has to be on board with that, including, and a lot of those sessions are driven by the mental conditioning coaches. So it's a great space to be and to observe and to watch. But again, most of these guys can't get to that point if they're not physically durable as well. You can't expect them to take it down to the line if they're not physically capable and they're fatigued by the end of that game. You can't expect a bowler to run and execute those skills in that 20th over and deliver that perfect Yorker, deliver that perfect bouncer consistently if they're not conditioned to do it and they're fatigued. Fatigue is your biggest enemy to performance and injury. So how do we then, as a support staff and a training staff, ensure that they are physically able to deliver and execute those skills when they're most wanted? So it comes right back, therefore, again to what I said, which is preparation. And preparation, and good preparation, is born out of good planning. And good planning is born out of knowing your individuals that you're working with, their limitations, their strengths, mental, physical, whatever they may be, and working with those. So that's where it all starts. And then the thing that sort of rounds it all off and brings it all back is, and as you mentioned before, in the conditions in India and the very difficult sort of environments we work in, is recovery. And how good are we at recovery and getting our players fully recovered? And that's where we've invested most of our time, money, and expertise over the last few years, is in the area of recovery. Because the teams that recover better are the ones that are then able to prepare better, which are then able to perform better. So the big focus for us, for our players now, is on this whole concept of recovery and delivering that consistently for our players in the particular geographical streams that India presents during April, May, June in India.
Yeah. So slightly shifting gear on that particular piece, John, is the compare contrast between sports and corporate. Right? You mentioned about high performance in sports, match situational awareness, all of it. How do you see this in the corporate world? What can corporate learn from the sporting world?
Everything. And what can we learn from the corporate world? They're all highly functioning, highly performing, extreme in most cases individuals. And if we use this term now, the corporate athlete, and we are managing our corporate athletes, and I do quite a few talks to corporates around managing, particularly their C-suite guys, around managing them like athletes. Because, and this is an interesting story, I was talking at an event here in Bombay with a number of corporates, but one of the people that was at that event was she was the head of HR for one of the Fortune 500 companies, one of the world's largest companies. She was from New York, and she'd come to Bombay to work with some of their employees over here and visiting a factory. And it was monsoon time, and she had landed the night before. She had then gone to the hotel and then slept poorly. Then she had to travel all the way up to Wapi to their factory and back, and something happened, and it took 4 hours to get there and 3 hours to get back, and she was exhausted, and then she had to front up the next morning to do a presentation at this course or this conference that we were at, and she was exhausted. And I remember talking to her afterwards, and I said to her, what do you do in terms of recovery and preparing yourself for these events? And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, if I took all your markers now, what we call your stress markers, if I measured your cortisol and I took all your HRV marking and, all these things, looked at your sleep profiles and broke them down, I said, I can guarantee that what I will be seeing will be the equivalent of that of an elite athlete or a cricketer after an IPL game. And I said, so therefore, why aren't you exposed to the same recovery protocols and methods and ideas that our athletes are? Because your decisions and you working under pressure and you working in a fatigue state can impact not just thousands, but hundreds of thousands of potential employees. You can impact the bottom line of a company. You can impact, positively or negatively, the lives of thousands. So she was quite intrigued by this. And I said, well, really you should be taking on board some of the recovery protocols that our athletes are. And your C-suite members should be doing the same thing. Because at the end of the day, I talk about longevity with my athletes and improving their life cycle. But how are we looking at the corporate longevity space as well and bringing the same ideas and understandings and delivering there? to improve performance outcomes. So it's all about improving performance outcomes and managing assets. So you can speak the same language. What am I? I'm just an asset manager at the end of the day. I have 24 assets that I work with for 10 weeks of the year, and I have to make sure that every one of those assets returns on the investment that we've made in them. And how do I do that? I do that by preparing them better than anybody else. On their performance on match day, I ensure that they have access to the best hydration, the best nutrition, the best preparation, warm-up, whatever, and then I expose them to the best recovery protocols that are available. So that's how I manage an asset, much the same way that any corporate or enterprise manages their assets. So I think we can look at it in very, very similar terms, but I also think we need to manage our individuals much, much better in the corporate space as well. And there are a lot of learnings from the sporting environment that can be taken into the corporate world that will be of great value and great benefit.
Absolutely. You did mention about recovery protocols. If there are easy to practice tips that our listeners can benefit, what would some of those recommendations of a recovery protocol would be?
Number one, sleep. The more and more we know about sleep, the more and more we understand just how important it is, and particularly for recovery. And again, I come back to the great Shane Warne, with whom I worked with for 10 years, and he always used to say to me, John, sleep is the best medicine. And I was convinced he was just saying it because he wanted to sleep in and he loved sleeping. But actually, he was spot on. If you deprive someone of sleep, whether you're an athlete, and we know the numbers on performance and injury risk with athletes that are deprived of sleep, we know the numbers on cognitive performance in corporates and everyday individuals, and particularly students, when we deprive them of sleep. And with the various technologies we have now, we can map that so closely. So for me, sleep is number one. Do not compromise on sleep. And there are so many ways that we can improve our sleep as well, from what we eat, when we eat, how much we... what supplements we take, what types of food we eat, how we train, all those sorts of things can impact on sleep. The other one, again, is nutrition. And nutrition is at the core of all recovery, whether it's you, me, a corporate, anybody, elite sports person. So nutrition has to be factored in. And the main reason that it's nutrition is because it impacts on inflammation. And inflammation is at the source of all disease. Inflammation is at the source of injury, and inflammation is at the source of all poor performances. So we've got to reduce inflammation as much as we can, and the best way to do that is through nutrition and sensible nutritional practice. Hydration, that's as important to you and me as it is to an athlete who I'm trying to protect and that asset that I'm trying to manage. So there are a lot of low-hanging fruits when it comes to recovery. And as I said to that corporate lady during that talk, was that there are so many things that you can implement tomorrow. They're going to positively impact on your performance outcomes when you get up next to speak in front of your shareholders or whoever it may be. So we just got to be smart about it. And that's where I said, let's start looking at other sports. Let's corporates start looking at sport for ways to improve their performances. Let us take lessons and learnings from the way corporate structure and reporting structures and organization structures, because that all impacts on performance as well within a sporting organization. If you have a poor management structure, you have a poor reporting structure, you have a poor organization structure, therefore things fail, logistics fails, communication fails, and then ultimately that's going to impact negatively on your performance team or on your athletes. So we've got a lot to learn the other way as well. So this is where I think we can start having more meaningful conversations between corporates and sporting bodies and sports people about how we can benefit from each other.
Looks like the synergies are there for everybody to benefit if you can leverage it rightly. Now we are in the power of three round. The first of the power of three round question coming to you, John. 3 pieces of advice that you would give to your older self, to your future self.
Start resistance training, keep walking, and sleep. They're the three. They're probably the 3 things that as I get a bit older, and as you know, I've been around for a long time now. They're probably my 3 mantras that I'll take forward for me. And if there was to be a 4th one, it was to just keep smiling.
Okay, it's a good start, John. 3 things to watch out in the space of sports medicine and innovation.
The growth of technology and their value for the sports person. The value of recovery, and then within that, the value of sleep and our recognized benefits from that. And then probably the understanding that it's an old saying, but there's no I in team. Everybody needs to push and pull their own weight in order for success to follow.
3 individuals you would love to have lunch or dinner with?
I'd love to have met Roger Bannister, the first person to break the 4-minute mile, because there's some great stories around him. Bob Dylan is one person I'd like to sit down to. I know you don't get much out of him, but I think what he does say would be of enormous value. And then probably the third one, I'd love to spend some time with Barack Obama for various reasons, but someone again who broke the mold. And then a close fourth would be Nelson Mandela. You know, having been to Robben Island and spent some time there, and you know, these are game changers. These guys are all game changers in their own right. But I think he would be another person I'd love to spend some time with.
Nice. Talking about game changers, different kind of a game here. 3 best IPL games that you remember or you want to forget.
Oh, if there's one I want to forget, the one against Mumbai at Mumbai, where Mumbai needed 170 off, I think it was 13 overs, which in those days, 2013 or 14 or whatever it was impossible. Now it's not so, and we lost that off the last ball, and then there was confusion over who had won and who hadn't won, and we thought we were told we won, and then we hadn't. It's the only game that I ever saw Rahul Dravid get emotional. It's the only game where I felt that I was going to cry, to be perfectly honest. But a lot of learnings came out of that. Again, back to Shane Warne, a lot of learnings came out of that failure. And a lot of people grew out of that failure as well. Another failure which stands out for me was when we lost the Champions Trophy final in 2013, because I think that was the birth of particularly for me, Rahul Dravid's ability as a leader and as a potential leader of young men. And I saw the way he managed the Sanju Samsons of the world and some of these young guys. And it was that dressing room after we lost that probably gave me the most energy out of a losing dressing room that I've ever been in, because I saw the growth of some young players who are now still, you know, representing their country to this day, not just for India, but other nations. And then from a success perspective, the 2007 World Cup win, because it changed the way, not just cricket around the world, but it changed the face of sport in India going forward, because from that success grew the IPL, and from the success of the IPL has grown this whole universe of success of sport in this country. So I think we've got a lot to thank that 2007 World Cup win in South Africa from a bigger picture perspective.
Nice memories out there. John, 3 micro experiments for our listeners if they were to kickstart their fitness journey.
For starters, like just get moving. So don't ever, I think the biggest mistake we make is putting sport and fitness in the same conversation. And sport, or the understanding concept, or even the word sport in this country can be quite intimidating for a lot of people. So remove the word sport and just put in the word movement. I just want people to start moving, because movement is at the core of everything that's good. So movement, in whatever way, shape or form it is, and particularly for kids, is critical. So movement or physicality being number one. I've mentioned it so many times already, but sleep. Get into good sleep practices. Get your kids to get into good sleep habits and practices. And again, more is good. And then really, I'm going to put hydration and nutrition together, because you can't embark on any sporting journey, any health journey, any fitness journey without first addressing the nutrition piece. And there's an old saying that says you can't outrun a bad diet. So you can be doing all the best practices in the world in terms of, you know, movement and sport and physical activity, but if your nutrition's poor, then you're undoing all the good work. So nutrition, and along with nutrition comes really good hydration, particularly in India in summer, to get the best out of yourself, to get the best out of your brain. And all of those then impact on sleep. So you get nutrition right, you get hydration right, and you start moving, then you'll find that the key, or the elixir of recovery and health, sleep, then starts to improve. So they would be my big 3.
I cannot stress upon the importance of sleep to the number of times we have used the word sleep through the course of this conversation. So definitely something for our listeners to look out for. 3 book recommendations or 3 podcast recommendations.
The Alchemist was one book that really impacted me, Paulo Coelho. The Shantaram was one book that I read before I came to Bombay, and then I was very fortunate enough to become very close to Gregory Roberts himself. And there's another human being that I have met and spent time with, and if I hadn't met him and spent time with him, he would have been one of the 3 people that I would have wanted to have met and spent time with, Gregory David Roberts. So Shantaram is another book that really impacted me. And then there are great, I'm coming back to my profession now, and the books that have impacted me most, and there's a book called Clinical Sports Medicine, which is written by a guy called Peter Bruckner and Karam Khan, and that has been the biggest professional impact on me was that text, both as a budding young sports physio, but also now as a mature sports physio or mature sports physio and medical practitioner, was the impact that as a textbook had on me. Very few textbooks at university had an impact on me, but after university, this one particularly sort of took a hold of me and steered me in the direction of sensible science and sound research. And because of that text and the way that people like Peter Bruckner approached sports medicine for us, it was all based on sound science and solid research. And I don't think we do enough of that now, particularly in the world of nutrition. And that's something that we all need to get back to, is this foundation of good, solid research and science.
John, you're doing wonderfully well in this part of the round. The last of the part of the round question is 3 notable moments in your illustrious career.
There's been so many. I think graduating was one, and because it opened the world for me into the world that I love, which is sport, people, and travel. And then on the back of that, being then able to impact positively at a number of levels. So the day I graduated, I think, from the University of South Australia for my second degree, meeting, what sport does is it takes you not just across the globe, but it exposes you to some of the best people, not just in sport, but in general. So I've been very fortunate to meet some amazing world leaders, elite sports people, who've all excelled at some level and given me learnings on the back of those conversations. And, I think stepping off the plane in Bombay for that first time was also hugely impactful for me and looking back on it, because it opened the sort of the final frontier for me, which was entering the best of the best in terms of sport and cricket, and being able to work with the best of the best and have an impact on those guys as well. And then because of that, I've now been able to have a positive impact in some small way for the rest of sport in this country. And India's brought me my wife, it's brought me my son, it's brought me, so many other incredibly positive things that have impacted me in a really, really good way. So I think that would be my key highlights.
Wonderful. John, thanks so much for that. That was the part of 3 round. As we get closer to home run, what's next for John?
I've been asked that a lot, actually. And people say, John, one of the questions I get asked is, John, what are you doing in India 20 years later? And I think I sort of alluded to that throughout this conversation, is that there's so much more to do. I think we've just scratched the tip of the iceberg. I see enormous potential in India in sport. I see potential not just in the sports people, but in sport in general. And the impact that sport has, therefore, on the lives and well-being of the whole population, from a health, wellness, agenda. So sport has got to be that vehicle to drive large-scale systemic change for the better in this country, and all the other things that it delivers on. So for me, that's really, really important that I still run with that and be part of that if I can, and try and be as impactful as I can in that arena as well. As I said, the visibility of cricket is still here, so we need to use that to our advantage and use it for good and use it for positive change that's going to impact a lot more people than just cricketers and the cricket population. And so through my work with the Go Sports Foundation, I think we're able to do that for other sport in this country. And then, for me, it's also this continual discovery and continual learning. And every day I wake up, it's a learning journey, and as it should be for all of us. That the minute we stop learning is the minute we start dying. So for me, that constant sort of learning journey, and I think India presents that, and particularly from an opportunity perspective, more than most countries in the world at the moment. So that's why I'm still excited to be here.
John, this show is all about creating ripples of inspiration. Before we sign off, what would be John's Inspire Someone Today message for all of our listeners?
Inspiration's got to come within, and inspiration ultimately comes from personal drive to impact some sort of change. So everybody in their own small way has the ability to impact change. And you can choose that to be a negative or a positive impact, but that's got to come from you. So for all of us that have a special something, and everybody has a special gift. Once you discover that special gift, make sure that you're in a position to amplify it so that it impacts on other people. And, fortunately for me, sports physio, sports medicine, sports science was one of my special gifts. And I'm trying to use that special gift to impact positively on a larger scale. Everybody, no matter who you are, has some sort of special gift that should be recognized. And when it is recognized by you, the individual, that you then amplify that and take that to benefit your immediate circle as well as perhaps a larger audience as well.
That's a fantastic message from the high performance coach is find your special gift. Inspiration is within. On that note, John, you have been a fantastic ambassador for your profession. Thank you for taking time. Thank you for what you have been doing for the global sports regime as well as the sports in India. Really appreciate you taking time and sharing your insights with me and my listeners.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Inspire Someone Today. This is Srikanth, your host, signing off. Until next time, continue to carry the ripples of inspiration. Stay inspired, keep spreading the light.